Perhaps for a new generation of people who are entering political discourse for the first time, particularly online, their first interaction with that is through identity politics.
Yep.
And that is a very polarising thing online. Is it in the interests of the left in trying to push left's economic discourse to also pair that with identity politics and the reaction that that can have?
Yep. I see the two as mutually constitutive. You can't understand race without understanding the economic basis of colonialism. You can't understand the role of women in society, I think, as a man, without materialist feminist Marxism, right? So I think that the two are deeply integrated. And I'll give you an example. I was in Waterloo the other day, and I go up the escalators, and there's just a black guy dressed in a costume like the Lion King. Then I go to the toilet. Above every urinal is a picture of a 4-year-old emaciated young girl, black. And people say, we're all the same. No, every single image I'm being subjected to is showing me that black people are very, very different to how we are in the West, right? Why is that? It's because of how capitalism developed over the last 500 years. And so if somebody is a person of colour and they're angry at how the police relate to them, behave to them, absolutely, I'm not going to deny that fact. And it's a big, from just a civil, you don't need to be a socialist to address that. You can be a liberal and say, no, equality under the law. What I would say is there's a deeper context as to why that is happening. There's a historical set of reasons as to why that's happening. And so I don't think you can understand one without the other. However, I wouldn't dismiss identity politics and say, you don't get the whole thing. I would say that the economic kind of analysis enriches your understanding of identity, actually, particularly in Britain, because we're a post-imperial power. We need to be very, very clear about our role within creating a world, which is what we did after the 1700s, a world of capitalism, but also a world of whiteness, and the creation of whiteness as a social category. It's a socially constructed category. Yes, clearly people have white skin, some people have different coloured skins, but that delineation of white people from other people is a social construct. So I'll give you an example. If you meet a Muslim convert, Tommy Robinson came out of prison the other day, had a big beard, had hair, and people were joking, you look like a Muslim convert. He actually reminded me of a Chechen that fought for ISIS in Iraq. And the point is how you racialise just through a way you dress, or your name, or your facial hair. So my name, I had my mother's husband's name, it wasn't my dad, Aaron Peters. I was clean shaven, I went to a grammar school. So I was racialised as kind of like European-y, Middle Eastern-y maybe, right? But if my name was Tariq Ramadan, and I grow a beard, and I'm wearing a taqiyya on my head, I'm racialised as a Muslim. So we need to understand racialisation, the construction of race, and Britain played a really important role in that shift alongside capitalism.
And that construction of race, is it done as a deliberate otherisation to obfuscate direction away from economic analysis of the people's material conditions?
Yeah. Well, my colleague at Novara Media, Ash Sarkar, would give you a far more erudite answer than I could offer. But if you look at, for instance, the Confederacy, the southern states of the United States, you had working class whites in the Confederacy. However, they consented to a system where they were subordinate to other white people because they were above working class or indentured slave blacks. And so clearly in society, that distinction between the poorest poor of white communities and that being reproduced by elite interest, because at least it gives them succor to know, well, they're not these people. You see it in this country in the 19th century with the Irish. The poorest poor of English working class people hated the Irish, and that suited elite interests extraordinarily well. Helps undermine Chartism, helps undermine republicanism, helps undermine Labour-based socialism. So couldn't agree more, although it's not that new. I think this is integral to systems of domination really since the 18th century.
So how do we break down that otherised stratification of society?
Wow. I mean, I would start with the presumption we're all racist. I think that's a perfectly healthy place to start. We're all racist. And then I think we have to constantly interrogate our relations to women, to trans people, to people of colour. Nobody eliminates these things. And this is where I think a Marxist disagrees with the liberal, right? You can't just step out of ideology, right? We're 200,000 years old as a species. Your ancestors, God knows, they have 100,000 years ago, their genome is imprinted on you. The social behaviours which we've accumulated at the same time, yes, that's not imprinted on your DNA, but it's imprinted very much on our social processes. It's the idea you can just step outside of ideology, step outside of history. You can't. And so I think one of the valuable things of Marxism in the second half of the 20th century is understanding that oppression and exploitation aren't the same thing. It took Marx to teach us about exploitation under capitalism, But it took the scholars Frantz Fanon, Michel Foucault, Silvia Federici, it took them to understand that oppression is something a little bit different sometimes. Almost always, however, this is where I think Marx is very powerful, they overlap. Very, very often oppressions overlap matrices of exploitation.
Is it important then to rebalance the privileges to give a greater platform to those oppressed communities?
Within reason. I think it's more important to give them resources. You know, you'll often go to an event and people say, oh, let's have a person of colour speak, a woman of colour speak, or a trans person speak. The platform is no good if they haven't got the resources, if they haven't had the training. If you have a white kid, 25 years, had the best education money can buy, and then you've got a black kid turn up, and they're not starting at the same place. So it's not about, well, we'll give them equality in the labour market, or we'll give the same platform for them to speak their mind. They haven't had access to the same set of resources. So you need to give them a platform, but you also need to build a society where resources like housing, education, healthcare, transport, information, what I call universal basic services, are available to all. Because I believe in the liberal ends, right? I believe that each person is uniquely determined to define their own life, but that means nothing unless you have the resources to do it. You're not self-authoring your life if you haven't got a roof over your head, or if you haven't got an education, or if you're sick. So the platforms matter, but so do the resources and how we build society more generally.
So beyond just balancing access to resources, it's an obligation to pay reparations to these disadvantaged communities.
So in the global north, in Britain, I would see constructing a socialist society where housing, education, healthcare as a form of reparations. If it's freely available to everyone, irregardless of race or class, I view that as a kind of reparations. In terms of north-south relationship, obviously a bit different. I would say the global north should pay for the global south to transition away from fossil fuels. I talk about that in the book. You do that through some of the mechanisms I talk about with socialising finance, national investment banks. And that does a few things. It helps us meet our targets quickly enough. But it also, as you've highlighted, helps us to begin to address the historical inequalities built on racism and capitalism.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.